Hey, fellow Enneagram enthusiasts, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. You know how we do it here. And today we're diving into the world of George Harrison.
Ooh, exciting.
But not just, as like the Beatle George Harrison that we all know and love. We're going kind of deeper.
Okay.
We're going to look at him through the lens of the Self-Preservation Four.
Interesting.
And, our listeners, they know about the fours, right?
Yes.
Like all their depth, their creativity, and their longing for authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to see how that self-preservation instinct really adds like a whole other dimension to all that.
I'm excited.
Me too. And you know what's so cool about George Harrison is there's so much to unpack with him.
Yeah.
We've got his introspective lyrics,
Yeah,
right? So his groundbreaking use of the sitar.
Yes.
And then there's the whole, concert for Bangladesh.
Oh, yeah. His humanitarian work.
Incredible. So much to talk about.
I think the best place to start is probably with just a quick overview of the self-preservation four subtype.
Please.
So, at their core, they're still fours, right? They still have that desire for authenticity.
Right.
But with the self-preservation instinct, it takes on this really interesting flavor. It's almost like they're trying to build this emotional sanctuary within themselves.
Okay. So like they're trying to manage their inner landscape.
Exactly. It's about creating this sense of safety and security in their inner world.
I see. And how do you think that manifests in George Harrison's life? Like in his music, for instance?
Well, I think While My Guitar Gently Weeps is a really good example. It's a classic song, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's not like this huge outburst of emotion. It's much more subtle. It's melancholic. It's almost like he's whispering a confession to us.
Well, that's a great point. It's like a very controlled, kind of guarded way of sharing his inner world.
Exactly. And that's really typical of the self-preservation four. They don't tend to like these big, dramatic displays of emotion. They process things very deeply internally, and then they express them in these really indirect ways.
And in this case, I guess the guitar becomes that vehicle for channeling those complex feelings.
I think so.
So then how do you think the whole self-preservation instinct played into his decision to incorporate the sitar into his music?
That's an interesting question because it was a pretty revolutionary move at the time, right? Like a real departure from the traditional Western music scene.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, some people might just see it as purely like an artistic choice. But I think there's probably more to it than that.
I agree, because for the self-preservation, for finding ways to express their unique individuality is crucial. For them, that's how they create that inner security.
So it's like by pushing those musical boundaries, he was also carving out this space for himself to feel safe and authentic within that world.
Exactly. It's about creating that sense of belonging, but on his own terms.
That's so interesting. And, it wasn't just about the music, right?
Right.
Like his whole lifelong interest in Eastern spirituality and meditation and Indian culture. I mean, all of that seems connected to this too.
Absolutely. It was all part of his journey of exploring his inner world. And, for the self-preservation four, connecting to something bigger than themselves is a huge part of creating that sense of inner sanctuary.
It's like he was always on this quest for meaning and self-understanding,
Yeah.
searching for ways to create that peace and stability within himself.
Yeah. And that's such a key aspect of the self-preservation four. They crave that emotional depth, but they also need that sense of grounding and security. It helps them navigate the world in a way that feels safe and manageable.
That makes me think about his humanitarian work too, especially the concert for Bangladesh. That was such a groundbreaking event, like one of the first huge charity concerts ever.
It was.
Do you think there's a connection between his self-preservation, four tendencies, and his drive to, alleviate suffering on such a massive scale?
That's a really insightful question. I think there's a good chance that his compassion was at least partly a way of him managing his own inner world. Well, by focusing on the needs of others, he could channel his energy into something bigger than himself. It gave him a sense of purpose and meaning, and that probably helped him deal with the intensity of his own emotions.
So it's not that he was using humanitarian work to avoid his feelings.
Right.
But that it was a way to channel his empathy and his deep sense of connection to humanity into something positive.
Exactly. And this is something you see a lot with self-preservation fours. They're so sensitive to suffering, both their own and the suffering of others. And that can lead to this really powerful urge to make a difference in the world.
So it's like he created a sense of inner harmony by working towards a more harmonious world.
Yeah. And it's such a powerful testament to the self-preservation instinct. It's not always about retreating from the world. It can also be about finding ways to engage with it, but in a way that feels safe, meaningful, and ultimately authentic.
I love that.
Yeah.
And speaking of authenticity, I think it's time to dig a little deeper into George Harrison's songwriting.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, it really does. And it shows how much we can learn by, really understanding these subtypes.
Totally. Right? It's not enough to just know someone's a 4. We have to look at how their dominant instinct, shapes how they see the world.
It makes me think of, other artists who might fit this self-preservation 4 profile. There's often this kind of quiet intensity to their work.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a sense of depth and introspection that you just don't find everywhere.
That's a great point. It really speaks to the power of the Enneagram. It's not just about understanding ourselves.
Yeah.
It's about understanding everyone around us, too.
Totally.
And once you start recognizing these patterns, you see them everywhere.
You do. It's true.
And it opens up this whole new level of empathy and appreciation for how different everyone is.
It really does. Yeah, it's like learning a new language.
It is, yeah.
That helps you understand all the little things about why people do what they do.
Exactly. And speaking of expression, I think we should talk more about George Harrison's songwriting. How did his self-preservation 4 tendencies show up in his lyrics?
Well, if we go back to While My Guitar Gently Weeps, there's a line that I think really gets at the heart of the self-preservation 4. It's, I look at the world and I notice it's turning.
Yes, such a good one. There's this real sense of detached observation in those lyrics.
Isn't there?
Yeah, it's like he's so connected to the world,
Right.
but also apart from it at the same time. Like he's watching everything unfold with this mix of melancholy and wonder.
You know that melancholy, that seems to be a theme in a lot of his music.
Oh, sure.
It's not like over the top or anything,
Right?
but it's always there, like a subtle undercurrent.
And that's so typical of the self-preservation 4. There's this underlying sadness, this longing for something more
Yeah,
that often comes out in their art.
I see that.
But it's important to remember that for them, it's not about wallowing in that sadness.
Right.
It's about expressing it, containing it, integrating it into their experience.
That makes sense. So it's about acknowledging it and working with it, not pretending it's not there.
Exactly. And I think that's a big part of why his music connects with so many people. He's not afraid to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
but he's also showing us how to do that with grace and strength.
It's like he's giving us permission to feel everything, to acknowledge the hard stuff without letting it take over.
Exactly. And that's such an important message, especially in a world that's always telling us to put on a happy face and pretend everything's perfect.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by understanding Harrison through this self-preservation 4 lens, it's not just about him,
Right.
We're also learning about ourselves and how we each deal with life.
Absolutely. The Enneagram is all about self-discovery.
Yeah.
And by seeing how it plays out in other people's lives, it helps us understand our own patterns and motivations better.
It's like looking in a mirror,
It is, yeah.
but the reflection is coming from someone else's experience.
That's a great way to put it. And it reminds me of how important Harrison's spiritual journey was to him.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I wonder if his self-preservation 4 tendencies influenced his exploration of Eastern spirituality.
It's interesting to think about, like how his search for inner peace might have led him to those practices.
Well, remember, self-preservation 4s are often drawn to things that are mystical and transcendent.
Okay.
They're looking for something that gives their life meaning,
Right.
something that connects them to something bigger than themselves,
I see.
and that can provide a sense of security and grounding.
And Eastern spirituality, with its focus on meditation and self-awareness and the interconnectedness of everything,
Yeah.
it definitely offers a way to explore all of that.
Exactly. And I think his exploration of Hinduism specifically gave him a way to understand the world and his place in it.
And it's so cool how he wove those spiritual principles into his music and his life.
It really is.
Like it wasn't just a hobby for him.
Right.
It was a deep part of who he was.
It shaped his values and everything he did. And you know
Right.
what's so inspiring about that? He wasn't afraid to be himself, even when it meant going against what everyone else was doing.
That's true.
It speaks to how powerful authenticity can be.
Yeah. And his decision to embrace Eastern spirituality and use the sitar in his music,
Yeah,
those were pretty unconventional choices back then.
totally. And it reminds us that being truly authentic often means challenging the norm
Right.
and doing what feels right for you. even if it's different.
It's like he was leading the way for others to do the same,
It was.
to be themselves and express themselves without fear.
Every act of authenticity is a little revolution.
Love that.
And it can have a ripple effect way beyond ourselves.
Like a beacon of light.
Yeah, showing others the way.
Exactly. And that's the legacy George Harrison left behind.
It is creativity, compassion, and a deep commitment to living a truthful life.
A legacy that still inspires people all over the world.
It does. And it reminds us that even when we're being quiet and introspective, we can still make a huge difference.
We can. And speaking of making a difference, we should talk more about Harrison's humanitarian work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The Concert for Bangladesh was such a groundbreaking event.
It really was.
It says so much about his empathy and his desire to help those who are suffering. It was one of the first big charity concerts ever.
It was.
And it raised millions of dollars for refugees from the war in Bangladesh. It's amazing.
It really is a testament to the power of music to unite people and inspire action.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to think about the role that Harrison's self-preservation for tendencies might have played in all of this.
You mean like his desire to create inner peace might have extended to wanting to create a more peaceful world for everyone?
Exactly. You know, self-preservation fours are super sensitive to suffering.
Right.
And they often feel a strong need to make a positive impact.
So it's not just about finding safety and stability for themselves,
Right.
but also about extending that to others.
Right. Precisely. And that's what makes Harrison's humanitarian work so powerful. It's an expression of his deep empathy and his belief in compassion.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible to think how much he accomplished.
It really is. And it shows how the Enneagram can help us connect the dots, you know?
Mm.
It helps us see how someone's art, their spirituality, their actions, all these different parts of their life,
Yeah.
they're all connected by their deepest motivations and desires.
It's like putting a puzzle together.
Exactly. When all the pieces finally fit, you get this beautiful picture of the whole person.
And in Harrison's case, it's a picture of a man who was so in tune with himself.
Absolutely.
He wanted to create a sense of safety and security, both for himself and for the world around him.
And he used his incredible gifts to make a real impact.
He did, on music, on culture, on humanitarianism. It's amazing.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive into George Harrison as a self-preservation four, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I think for me, it's the realization that even people who seem to have it all, you know, the fame, the fortune, the talent,
Yeah.
they still struggle.
They
still have their own inner battles.
It's true. And those battles can actually make them stronger.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we're all human.
We are.
We all have our own journey.
Yeah.
And true happiness comes from being ourselves and using our unique gifts to make the world a better place.
Beautifully said. And you know what? Maybe by tapping into our own self-preservation instincts,
Oh, yeah.
we can all create those little inner sanctuaries.
That's a great point.
Find a sense of peace and purpose,
Yeah.
even when the world feels crazy.
Exactly. And for all our listeners out there who identify with the self-preservation four,
Yes.
remember that your sensitivity, your depth, your longing for authenticity, those aren't weaknesses.
Not at all.
They're strengths.
They're what make you special.
Absolutely.
You have a unique perspective to share with the world.
You do.
And your contributions matter.
Keep searching. Keep creating. Keep shining your light.
That's it. And never forget the power of your quiet strength.
Yeah.
You can make a real difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into George Harrison and the Self-Preservation Four. Until next time, keep exploring the Enneagram and keep discovering the amazing tapestry of human experience.
See you next time.